Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you own, by some estimates, roughly 2% of the entire American economy. Not 2% of a company, 2% of a country. That was John D. Rockefeller at the peak of his power. And then slowly, deliberately, over decades, he gave most of it away. The question that historians, economists, and philosophers have argued about ever since is a simple one. Why? To understand what Rockefeller gave up, you first have to understand what he built. Born in 1,839 inches rural New York, John Davison Rockefeller did not come from privilege. His father was a con man, literally. William Rockefeller traveled the countryside selling fake cancer cures. His mother was deeply religious, frugal, and disciplined. John absorbed everything from her side of the equation. By the time he was a teenager, Rockefeller was keeping meticulous ledgers of every penny he earned and every penny he spent. He tithed 10% of his very first paycheck to charity, not because someone told him to, because he believed it was the right thing to do. That detail matters more than it seems. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil, and what followed was one of the most ruthless, brilliant, and controversial corporate expansions in human history. Rockefeller didn't just build a company. He engineered a system. He negotiated secret railroad rebates that undercut every competitor. He bought refineries not by force, but by making owners an offer they genuinely couldn't refuse. Sell now at a fair price, or watch us put you out of business within the year. Most sold, some fought. Most of those who fought lost anyway. By 1882, Standard Oil controlled over 90% of all oil refining in the United States. Think about that number, 90%. In a country that was rapidly becoming the most industrialized nation on Earth, one man sat at the center of the energy supply, like a spider at the middle of an enormous web. But the web had threads that led somewhere uncomfortable. The early 1900s brought a journalist named Ida Tarbell. Her father had been a small oil producer, one of the men crushed by Standard Oil's expansion. She spent years digging through documents, interviewing survivors, reconstructing the machinery of Rockefeller's empire piece by piece. In 1904, she published her findings in a book called The History of the Standard Oil Company. It was not an opinion piece. It was 19 chapters of documented evidence, secret deals, price manipulation, the systematic destruction of competitors. The American public was furious. Rockefeller, for his part, refused to engage. He said almost nothing publicly. He played golf. He handed out dimes to children. He attended church. The contrast between the image he projected, calm, generous, pious, and the empire Tarbell had exposed, created a kind of cognitive dissonance that fascinated and enraged people in equal measure. And then the government came for him. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly under the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered it broken into 34 separate companies. It was the largest corporate breakup in American history. The press treated it as Rockefeller's defeat, his destruction. The press. Here is where the story takes its most ironic turn. Because of the breakup, Rockefeller held shares in all 34 successor companies simultaneously. And as those companies competed freely in a growing market, their combined value exploded. Standard Oil of New Jersey became ExxonMobil. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. The breakup didn't ruin Rockefeller. It made him richer. Within a few years, he became the world's first confirmed billionaire. In nominal terms, a figure so staggering that adjusted for today, it would be somewhere between $300 and $400 billion. The man the government tried to destroy ended up wealthier because of the attempt. But here is where the story shifts from business to something harder to categorize. By this point, Rockefeller was in his 70s. He had lived through the Spanish-American War the rise of the progressive movement, and a decade of being one of the most hated men in America. His personal doctor had told him bluntly that if he did not reduce his stress, he would not survive much longer. He had lost much of his hair. He was surviving on a diet of crackers, milk, and small portions. His body was, by visible accounts, failing him. And yet, at the moment of his greatest financial triumph, something shifted. Rockefeller had always given money away. Remember that childhood ledger, that first tithe. But now he began giving with a different scale and a different intention. He didn't just want to donate. He wanted to reshape the world in the way he had reshaped the oil industry, systematically, strategically, permanently. In 1913, he established the Rockefeller Foundation with a mandate, in its own words, to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. It wasn't a gesture. It was an institution staffed with scientists, economists, and public health experts. The foundation funded the eradication of hookworm disease across the American South, a parasitic infection that had quietly devastated the productivity of millions of poor rural workers. It funded the development of modern medical education standards that transformed how doctors were trained across the entire country. It poured money into public health campaigns in Asia, Latin America, and Africa at a time when no government was thinking globally about these problems. He also funded the University of Chicago, an institution that would go on to produce more Nobel Prize winners in economics than almost any other university on Earth. By the time of his death, in 1937, at the age of 97, Rockefeller had given away approximately $550 million. In his era, that sum represented a meaningful fraction of American GDP. In today's terms, it is a figure in the tens of billions. And the institutions he built are still operating, still distributing grants, still funding research. So we return to the question this video began with. Was it guilt? Was it strategy? Was it both? The honest answer is that it was almost certainly both, layered on top of something even more fundamental. The guilt argument has real weight. Ida Tarbell's investigation had exposed real damage. Real families had been ruined. Real communities had been hollowed out. There is evidence that Rockefeller was not entirely insulated from this. People close to him noted that the attacks on his character genuinely wounded him. He was a religious man who believed in accountability. The possibility that he was reckoning with consequences seems plausible, even likely. The strategy argument is also hard to dismiss. Rockefeller understood reputation as a form of capital. He had watched his name become a symbol for greed and excess. His philanthropic giving was carefully managed, publicly communicated, and tied to institutions that bore his name and extended his influence. The Rockefeller Foundation didn't just do good, it projected power, soft power, but power nonetheless. And then there is the third possibility, the one that is easiest to overlook. Rockefeller had been keeping ledgers since childhood. He had always tithed. He had always believed that wealth came with obligation. Perhaps the giving wasn't a correction at the end of his life. Perhaps it was always the plan. Perhaps for Rockefeller, accumulation and distribution were two phases of the same project. Build as much as possible so that you have as much as possible to give. What does any of this mean for us, watching from a distance of over 100 years? The Rockefeller story asks a question that every generation of wealth has to answer. What is money actually for? Accumulation has its own logic. Once you begin, the system rewards continuation. But Rockefeller's life suggests something uncomfortable, that the most powerful thing you can do with extraordinary resources might not be to hold them. It might be to deploy them in ways that outlast you by centuries. He lived to 97. He gave away more than most people will ever earn, and the institutions he built are still changing the world today. Whether that was guilt or strategy, in the end doesn't matter as much as this. He understood that legacy is the only currency that doesn't depreciate.